In Bobby's original book, the horizontal and vertical lines in the background of the illustrations form line charts for determining the distance covered in a given move. The rectangles of the grid measure 1 foot by 2.5 feet. The two horizontal lines in the wall represent the headline and waistline. They show upward and downward motion. From the other lines in the chart, you can gauge the forward and circular motion. The numbered sections on the grid assist in calculating the distance moved. In the videotape we've done to go with the book, we have changed these lines to 1 meter apart and have given you a midline reference on the wall. All of this should help you judge the distance moved and the motion used by the wrestlers.
Wrestling is a hand-to-hand contest between two opponents in which each attempts to control the other by placing him on his back with both shoulders touching the mat for a given number of seconds. The techniques used in wrestling have been passed down from ancient times. This video deals with one specific technique, the takedown. The wrestler with a superior knowledge of takedowns has a tremendous advantage. This video demonstrates various takedowns and shows the rewards of knowing these techniques. In each section of the video, you will encounter certain basic principles common to all takedowns. Constant attention to these principles will allow even the beginning wrestler to analyze the most sophisticated takedowns into simple components. The integral components of a successful takedown are the penetration, the setup, and finally the second move or breakdown, which is employed when your opponent has already countered your first move. Too little attention has been paid to both the setup and the second move. Knowledge of one component is insufficient. A successful wrestler must have several setups for his favorite takedown and several second moves that he may use from each setup. One of the most important facets of the takedown is the stance. The objective is to get an overall picture of your opponent without focusing attention upon any particular part of his body. There are three principal stances: the square, the staggered, and the drop step. Bobby's going to cover two of these with you right now and show you how you can successfully move your opponent from these stances.
Okay, the first stance is a square stance where your feet are parallel, knees bent, kind of bowed in. This position, your back's fairly straight, elbows in. You move into your opponent in a head-to-head position. Then next stance is the staggered stance, 1 foot forward. In this position here, trying to break your opponent's balance.
Penetration is essential to a good takedown. Penetration is moving in the direction of your opponent. This is done by two techniques. On the step in, you shift your weight to 1 foot and step with the other foot in the direction of your opponent. On the drop step, you take a step to place the weight on 1 foot and make a second step in the direction of your opponent with the other foot. Learning to transfer your weight is necessary for a good attack. Bobby's going to demonstrate some penetration drills to help you develop this technique. From a staggered stance, step into a double leg position. Next, move forward to your hands. Push off your front toe and dive forward, sliding on your shoestrings until your forward motion stops on an instant. Drill this technique using an opponent, and upon contact, step up with your back foot for balance. Run on your knees or stand at a 45-degree angle into your opponent. Drill this technique between your opponent's legs. Use the same technique past your opponent's body as he sidesteps similar to a bullfighter. Drill this technique and catch the leg that is moving and stand upward. Drill this technique and catch the stationary leg. partner, penetrate to double leg position, and trip or stand up to finish. Partner drills counters to this technique utilizing a body lock and underhook or front headlock. Counter this technique by blocking the head. Drill countering this technique by blocking the shoulder. Drill stopping the technique by utilizing a collar tie-up. The following are some effective takedown drills. The first, head-to-head with your opponent with your hands locked behind you. Practice stepping in to takedown position. Again, head-to-head with your opponent using wrist control. Step into takedown position. While head-to-head with your opponent, using biceps and elbow control, step into takedown position. Head-to-head with your opponent, using a shoulder push, step into takedown position. Head-to-head with your opponent, utilizing neck control, kneel into takedown position. Move your feet, change your levels, see who loses their balance. Head to shoulder, utilizing neck control, move into takedown position. The tie-up is the first step for any setup. Setups are devices that bait your opponent into making technical errors, such as raising his head, pulling back, reaching, or stepping. The tie-up should be made quickly while changing control points to get the opponent into motion. It is best made at a distance that will enable you to keep your elbows bent. Place your feet no more than 2 feet from his. The tie-up should be made by the hands coming from the lap position on the inside of your opponent's arms. Bobby will demonstrate several different tie-ups complete with finishes. While using an underhook-overhook tie-up, an effective drill is to move from the underhook to a high inside crotch or from the overhook to a fireman's carry. A variety of attacks can be set up using the 2-on-1 tie-up, as Bobby demonstrates here. The double leg tackle is a flying tackle similar to a football tackle. It begins from a staggered or drop step position. In the first move, your front leg steps between your opponent's legs, or at least in that direction, in an attempt to split his legs with advancing foot. Your head should be on the same side of the opponent's body as your back foot and should lead your body in, while your shoulder makes the first contact with his body. Take a long step to a crouch position so that you are close to the mat with your front knee pointing between your opponent's legs. Your knee should be bent down toward the mat, and your chest should be over your knee. Head up and arm in close to the body. All your weight should be on the front foot. At this point, transfer the weight to your toes and dive into your opponent by leaping off the toes of your front foot, flattening your toes beneath you as you leave the mat. Try to hit your opponent with your shoulder, keeping your head up. At the point of contact, your front knee will hit the mat and possibly your back knee will also. Your hands are grasping your opponent's legs with your wrists on the outside of his knees. His knee on your head side must be controlled by pulling it tight to your chest. You are now in position to start your breakdown. From an elbow control, Bobby releases the elbow and quickly hooks over the forearms, jerking them toward his chest. Then steps in for the tackle. While his opponent has wrist control, Bobby posts his opponent's wrists up and steps in for the double leg tackle. Bobby attempts to reach for his opponent's head. Upon his opponent's reaction to his reach, he starts to penetrate by moving his hands down and starting his drop step. Pay particular attention to the final penetration and the driving motion that is used to get it. From a double elbow control, as your opponent attempts to free his elbows by pushing you away, you change the position of your thumbs to the inside, and then posting his elbows, change levels and step in for the tackle. This setup is used when your opponent is controlling your elbow. Pulling his opponent's head down, Bobby slips his hands off of the neck, changes levels, and moves into position for the tackle. A drop step is used for penetration. From an elbow and wrist control, Bobby releases the wrist and catches his opponent's opposite wrist, then turns his head and uses his shoulder to knock his opponent's hand off. His opponent counters with a head block. Bobby uses the captured arm as a post to clear the arms while he uses a step in for the tackle. This maneuver is used when your opponent changes from an outside control to an inside position. As he makes this change in position, Bobby opens the palm of his hand and slaps his opponent's elbow across his body, stepping in for the penetration as he does so. From a head and arm control, Bobby applies pressure down towards the mat. His opponent reacts by pulling his head up. When Bobby feels the upward pressure, he releases the head and steps in for a double leg tackle. Bobby's opponent attempts to control his head with a collar tie while on his knees. Bobby executes a post and a drop step and pushes with his head into his opponent's side while stepping up with his outside leg to complete the tackle. From a position of wrist control by both wrestlers, Bobby rotates his right wrist down, then releasing his opponent's left wrist, he takes an arm drag, turning his opponent's body and stepping between his legs. He then reaches across his opponent's body as he lifts his leg off the mat. Breakdowns can be described as second moves that are determined by the position of your opponent's arms and feet after you have made your initial penetration. Bobby's attempted double has taken him to his knees. To finish, he steps up, pushing his head into his opponent's side, thereby forcing his opponent off balance. Bobby attempts to counter his opponent's double leg tackle by using a crossface. His opponent reacts and goes into his second move by controlling the knee. He then finishes by sitting through. From a double leg tackle position, White is attempting to counter by throwing his legs back. Bobby maintains control of White's left knee. By pulling his knee toward the mat, dipping his own right shoulder and lifting White with his left shoulder, Bobby forces White to the mat. He then steps over to assume his riding position. White's double leg tackle has taken him to his knees. He then steps up and behind Bobby's leg with his outside leg, driving with his chest as he trips with his foot. This knocks Bobby off balance and to the mat. Bobby is on his feet in a double leg tackle position. His opponent is attempting to counter with a crossface. Bobby steps in, kicking out his opponent's right leg and throwing him to his back. From a double leg position, Bobby bends his knee, applying chest pressure to his opponent's thigh, thus placing all of his weight on his opponent's right leg. Then, by stepping back, he extends the distance between his opponent's legs, while continuing to apply pressure towards the mat. This forces his opponent down. fireman's carry technique is similar to the double leg tackle penetration. You begin with a step between your opponent's legs, placing your head under the arm you are attacking or controlling. Your free arm goes inside his crotch, catching the leg above the knee. The stepping leg goes deep into the crotch, touching the mat in a kneeling position, with your near leg driving and pivoting and also coming to a kneeling position. This pivoting rotation straightens your back, lifting your opponent off the mat as you pull down hard on his captured arm. From this point, take your opponent over your head and throw his shoulder down to the mat. Note you must move to a staggered stance when you start to penetrate, making sure your opponent does not control your head. Place your head on the same side of your opponent's body as the arm and leg you are attacking, catching his arm as high on the triceps as possible. The setup for the fireman's carry is designed to do three things. First, make your opponent step toward you. Second, make your opponent move the arm that you plan to control away from his body. Third, make your opponent raise his head up. The second move for a successful fireman's carry is a throw to the mat. From a staggered stance, Bobby overhooks his opponent's arm and grabs his shoulder. He then moves toward the crotch, attacking the leg, makes his lift, and throws to the mat. Black goes from a double wrist control to an arm drag. White reacts by pulling his arm back, and black changes from a drag to an overhook. Black catches the arm, penetrates, and finishes the fireman's carry. White reaches to grasp Black's head. White catches the head and moves to his left, pulling the head toward his shoulder in the same direction he is moving. This tie-up is intended to get Black to raise his left arm away from his body. White then releases the head as he hooks the arm and steps in for the fireman's carry. From a staggered stance, Black does a head snap. As White reacts, Black reaches for arm control and begins his fireman's carry while White is straightening up. From a head and arm control, Black forces White's head down. White struggles to free his head. Black allows White to free his head, but maintains control of his arm. Black begins his penetration using a step-in and fireman's carry finishing. From a staggered stance, Black does a head snap. As White reacts, Black overhooks White's right arm and steps in for his fireman's carry. White tries to counter Black by whipping Black over. However, Black changes from a fireman's carry to a double leg tackle by attacking White's leg with both hands to finish the takedown. Black's fireman's carry takedown has been countered by White. Black maintains the arm control of the fireman's carry and uses a reverse elbow lock on White's free arm to control both arms. Black begins a sit-through motion, pulling White's left arm toward the mat and forcing White's right shoulder up and to the side. This motion is similar to a roll. Black forces White on his back and drives into White, making White carry Black's entire weight on the chest. Black then scissors his legs and comes out on top. White is positioned on his knees, and Black has placed his hands on White's shoulders with his thumbs in White's armpits. Black then takes a step, pushing White to his feet. As White comes to a standing position, Black releases his right hand and reaches inside the crotch for a fireman's carry. Black finishes with a lift and throw to the mat. White underhooks both of Black's arms and takes a step and squats, placing his head under Black's arm. White then looks up, blocking the arm and reaching behind the leg, at the same time driving across and forcing Black to the mat. From an underhook and wrist control tie-up, Black squats and lifts White's left arm. Black steps forward, lifting the arm, ducking his head under White's arm. Black releases the wrist, looks up to block White's arm, and drives off his right leg, placing himself behind White. Black has assumed wrist control. White has underhooked with his left arm. White then lifts his hand, squats, and steps under Black's arm. White looks up to block Black's arm, catches Black's leg, and drives across, forcing Black to the mat. From a wrist control and collar tie-up, Black attempts a foot kick. As White reacts to the foot kick, Black lifts the wrist and ducks his head under White's arm. Black is controlling White's wrist and elbow. Black lifts White's elbow straight out and pulls it over his shoulder. Black penetrates by stepping with his right leg and reaching for White's thigh with his left arm. Black's knee touches the mat as he pulls up on White's thigh and stands up. From an elbow-controlled tie-up, Black lifts White's elbow as he does a drop step. He pivots his body and moves his left leg between White's legs while going to his knee. Black reaches into White's crotch with his free arm. Note that the penetration is a drop step. From an underhook and wrist tie-up, Black lifts White's shoulder and ducks his head under White's arm. At the same time, Black does a knee dip and reaches for White's leg. Black begins to come to his feet, changing to a double leg tackle. Black assumes a wrist control and overhooks the forearm. Black pulls White's right arm down toward White's opposite knee. As White reacts by pulling his arm back, Black starts his high crotch takedown by lifting White's arm up and pulling it over his shoulder. Black makes his penetration, changing to a double leg tackle. From a wrist and elbow control, Black sets up a high inside crotch takedown by pulling White's right arm down. Black releases White's wrist and reaches inside White's crotch at the same time lifting the elbow. Black then goes into the high inside crotch position and changes to a double leg takedown. From a wrist control and elbow tie-up, Black releases White's right wrist and brings his hand behind White's left wrist while still controlling White's elbow. Black starts to push White's hand toward the mat, guiding the hand past his body. After clearing the arm past the body, Black steps in for the high crotch. Black steps up and changes to a double leg tackle. From an elbow tie-up, Black reaches his free arm for White's left leg. As White reacts by pulling his leg back, Black steps in for the high crotch. Black steps up and changes to a double leg takedown. On a single leg tackle, penetration should carry you directly to the leg you are attacking, keeping your head inside the leg. At this point, you should be on your knees. It's important to keep your opponent's weight on his free foot, which can be accomplished by standing up or bringing your outside leg up and driving across. The first, penetrate under the knee. Partner pushes you by and moves into tie-up. Shoestring drill. Try to touch your opponent's foot before he can move it. Bobby demonstrates the position of the hands in a single leg tackle. When shooting to the right arm will lock the left wrist. When shooting to the left arm will lock the right wrist. Using a drop step, black goes directly toward white's knee. Note the reaching right hand, the long step, and the position of the head. These techniques are designed to prevent the arm on the side of the leg that you plan to attack from countering. From a hand control position, black releases the hands and starts a head snap setup. White's reaction is to raise both his left arm and his head. Black times his penetration to white's reaction. Black has elbow and wrist control. He releases the elbow and quickly overhooks the forearm, jerking it toward his chest. He then releases the arm and begins a single leg tackle. White's reaction of pulling back allows him to attack the exposed leg. As White attempts head control, Black intercepts the left arm at the elbow with his thumb on the inside. He holds White's elbow to prevent the arm from countering his penetration as he steps in for the tackle. From an elbow and wrist tie-up, Black extends White's elbow by taking a drop step. As White's left arm is extended, Black posts the elbow and makes his penetration. White has wrist control and is attempting a collar tie-up. Black uses an elbow post setup. White's reaction is to move the leg on the side where black is posting the elbow. Black then attacks the leg on the opposite side. Black has elbow control and uses his forearm to knock White's arm from his head. This exposes White's leg. White is attempting a collar tie-up from the knees. Black waits for White's attempted collar tie-up, then using a forearm post, he attacks the exposed leg. Black has a wrist tie-up. He then begins an arm drag. The arm drag exposes White's leg. Black steps up to change to a single leg. He brings his head to the inside and steps over the legs, securing the single leg tackle. From a wrist tie-up position, Black moves to a shoulder snap setup. This is particularly effective when White is attempting elbow control. The shoulder snap frees the elbow and at the same time gets White to react by leaning forward. From a biceps control and wrist tie-up, Black releases the biceps and slaps the right wrist. He then begins his penetration as White reacts to the wrist slap. From a double wrist tie-up, Black releases White's left wrist and starts to drag his right arm. White reacts to the drag by pulling his arm away. Black then attacks the opposite leg. White attempts a collar tie-up. Black assumes elbow control with a wrist tie-up. He turns his head but not his body and pushes White's elbow down toward his opposite knee. Black then begins a single leg attack. Since straightforward penetration will place White's leg out of reach, it's necessary for Black to take a side step to cut off White's escape. White controls Black's elbow. Black uses a head snap technique to create an angle. He steps in and attacks the near leg while forcing the head away. The breakdown for the single leg tackle will depend upon the position of your opponent after you have attacked the leg. Black has attacked White's leg with a single leg tackle, and White has countered with an overhook. Black's second move is a rubber arm and back heel. Black has placed his left hand on the mat for support, and with a circular motion steps up and hooks the near leg. Controlling White's leg with his own, he begins his rubber arm. This is accomplished by turning the palm up and moving his head away from his opponent. He then drops his right shoulder and pulls his arm straight out. White has countered Black's attempted single leg tackle with an overhook. Black posts his left arm and pivots his right leg in a circular motion over the attacked leg. Using his arm for support, Black pulls back on White's heel, forcing his head into White's crotch while driving off his left leg. He then reaches inside the crotch and behind the knee, forcing White off balance. White has countered Black's single-leg tackle by thrusting his weight back into a sprawl. Black places his right hand behind White's legs for support and slides his knees forward, using his head and hand to lift, at the same time straightening his back. He starts the lifting motion and takes hold of the leg with both hands, then turns and drives forward and comes out on top. White has countered Black's single-leg tackle by thrusting his weight back in a sprawl. Black places his right hand between White's legs for support and slides his knees forward, using his head and hand to lift, at the same time straightening his back. Black starts to lift and takes hold of the leg with both hands. He then releases White's legs with his left arm and brings his hand inside around White's waist as he throws him to the mat. Black has a single-leg tackle and White counters with an overhook. Black releases his single leg and locks his hands in the bear hug position as he comes to his feet. He takes a step to the side, throwing White to the mat. Black has taken a single leg and White has countered with an overhook. Black moves into White, releasing his locked hands from the knee and stepping over White's trapped leg. This treetop brings the leg up in the air and tight to his chest. He then kicks out White's supporting foot, which sends him toppling to the mat. Black counters White's single leg with an overhook. White frees his leg with a step-over action, maintaining control of Black's leg by hooking it at the knee and at the ankle. He then steps inside Black's crotch and trips the far leg just above the knee as he rubber arms out. Black has a single leg tackle and White counters with an overhook. Black, bending at the knees, drops his hips and keeping his back straight, lifts for the finish. Black has a single leg tackle and White is countering with an overhook. Black releases his hands and slaps White's knee, at the same time stepping between White's legs into position for a double leg tackle. White secured a single leg tackle. Black is countering with an overhook. White reaches across and catches Black's free leg, driving across and tackling both of Black's legs. Black has a single leg tackle and White counters with an overhook. Black maintains control of the leg with constant downward chest pressure on White's upper thigh. Black's shoulders press tight to White's thigh for additional control. He then forces White's legs apart. When his legs are sufficiently spread, Black begins a circular motion, bringing his opponent to the mat. Black has countered White's attempted takedown with an overhook and is applying pressure downward. White, feeling the pressure, reaches inside Black's crotch, does a side roll underneath Black's body, and comes up on top. Black has a single leg tackle and White counters with an overhook. Black unlocks his hands at the knee and drops his right hand to White's heel. He then applies chest pressure on White's upper thigh and begins the breakdown, using his chest as a fulcrum and his right hand as a lever. Black has a single leg tackle and White is countered with an overhook. Black lifts his elbow up and does a knee dip while reaching his left arm into White's crotch. Black changes direction to complete the takedown. near arm and opposite leg takedown is actually a combination of two other takedowns. The arm is controlled as in a fireman's carry. The penetration is executed as in a single leg. In this technique, the arm that is controlled is taken in the direction of the opposite knee. Your head stays to the inside of your opponent's leg. The arm that is attacking his leg will lift it up. The controlling arm in the fireman's carry position will pull down on his arm, moving in circular motion, throwing him to his back. White is controlling Black's elbow. Black moves his hand from a biceps position to a shoulder position, snapping the shoulder and freeing the elbow at the same time. Black starts to attack the leg after he has cleared his elbow. His left leg starts to swing back, creating a circular motion which takes White to his back. White has elbow control. Black takes a collar tie-up and snaps White's head to the side. White's immediate reaction is to raise his head. Black, feeling this reaction, starts to attack the leg. Black is controlling White's arm with an overhook. He raises his hand and brings it down, snapping White's forearm. He then penetrates in for the opposite leg attack, much as he would on a single leg tackle. White has a collar tie-up and Black takes elbow control, placing his free hand behind White's wrist. He then pushes White's hand off his neck and down toward the mat and past his body. He then starts his penetration and finishes with a throw to the mat. Second moves for the near arm and opposite leg are also used for the fireman's carry. White is controlling Black's arm as in the fireman's carry, making sure to keep his head off the mat. He reaches across and behind Black's knee, placing the palm of his hand on the outside of Black's knee while pulling downward on his arm. White drops his shoulder and trips Black over his knee. White then scissors his legs and comes to his knees as he reaches up around his opponent's waist. White starts to pull down on Black's right arm, keeping his free hand on the mat and his head up. White maneuvers his elbow in a position behind Black's arm. White now drives his elbow under Black's armpit, at the same time pulling down on Black's forearm and sits to the side, forcing Black off balance. He then comes to his knees and on top by scissoring his legs over. For a successful arm drag, the arm has to be controlled above the elbow, turning the arm across and toward the opposite knee. This motion will expose the leg and the entire right side. Bobby's going to demonstrate proper wrist rotation on the arm drag. From a square stance, Black ties up for and fakes a fireman's carry. White reacts by moving his leg back. Black then changes to an arm drag and drives across to finish the takedown. White is controlling Black's wrist and head. He releases Black's head and reaches across his body to the arm for a fake arm drag. He then takes a short step to the outside of Black's right leg, pulls down on Black's arm toward the mat, and does a sit-through to finish the takedown. Black controls White's wrist. He then moves into position and attempts a foot kick. As White reacts, he changes to an arm drag and moves towards White's exposed sides. He then drives across to finish the takedown. Foot kicks are techniques used to break your opponent's balance by kicking one foot across his center of gravity. The important point to remember is that his weight has to be removed from the foot you plan to kick. The head snap technique is an effective move from a collar tie-up. It is particularly useful when your opponent has elbow control, either while standing or on his knees. From a collar tie-up, Black steps forward and to his left. He then pivots his body and snaps his elbow past White's chin while snapping his wrist. This creates an angle and enables him to penetrate. From a standing position, Black pulls White's head down by using a collar tie-up and wrist control. He then does a head snap which creates an angle, allowing him to go behind as White's momentum carries him past his body. From a wrist control and collar tie-up, Black fakes a foot kick. When White reacts, he uses a head snap to create an angle, placing him behind White. Black has assumed wrist and collar control. He then snaps White's head down to the side and drives his arm toward the mat and moves across White's body. The shuck is a technique to create an angle of advantage, which places you to the side of your opponent. White is controlling Black in a collar tie-up position. Black reaches over White's arm and assumes a collar tie-up. He then releases White's right wrist, placing his free hand behind White's elbow while taking a step and pulling White's head close to his body. Black uses his hand to snap White's hand off his head. White has a collar tie-up while Black controls the elbow. Black begins to create an angle by looking away and changing his foot position. At the same time, Black uses his thumb and drives White's elbow off his head and toward the mat. Black clears White's elbow past his head and drives across, placing himself in a controlled position behind White. Black controls White's elbow and far wrist. He then changes from elbow control to a collar tie-up. Black releases White's right wrist and he shucks the elbow. Black uses a collar tie-up while he controls White's left arm. He forces his elbow into White's chest, driving White off balance. Once White's side hits the mat, he changes position and ends up on top. The ankle pickup requires a back step to the side. The stepping leg will be on the side of the hand that attacks the ankle. You must place the controlled portion of your opponent's body over his ankle. The controlled portion is pulled down and placed at an angle over the foot so that your opponent cannot remove his foot. Your head must remain at the same level as the controlled portion. Once you reach the ankle, do not attempt to pick it up. Instead, push the controlled part of your opponent's body over his ankle. Using an underhook tie-up, Black controls White's arm. He then begins to maneuver backward in order to get White to step toward him. He applies pressure on White's right shoulder by pulling down in the direction of White's stepping foot. He then attacks the ankle, forcing White backward by pushing his shoulder over White's foot and pulling White's supporting leg off the mat. The head and heel ankle pickup is executed by placing your opponent's head directly over the foot you plan to attack. This is often done by using the collar tie-up. His head must be pulled down and placed at an angle over the foot so that he cannot move the foot you plan to attack. Your head must remain at the same level as your opponent's. Black is in an overhook and underhook position. He starts a whip over, and White takes a step forward to maintain balance. He then rotates his body and pulls White's shoulder toward his knee. He begins to attack the foot, using his shoulder to knock White to the mat. The headlock is accomplished by turning your hips into a position that carries your opponent off balance while you control his head. White has elbow control. Black reaches and catches White's head, snapping it down with his free hand. White reacts by pulling his head up. Black catches the head, throws his hip into White, and knocks White to the mat. A standing headlock is executed by stepping between your opponent's legs and turning your back to him, placing your hips across his body in order to pull his head over your hips. The head and arm tie-up is sometimes called a front headlock. Your arms are locked around the head and one arm of your opponent. Your shoulders should be applying pressure to the back of his neck. The trick is to keep his head down and control the arm. In the grip, the palm of your outside hand should be facing up. It is important to stay off your knees and to keep all of your weight resting on your opponent's neck and back. Bobby's going to demonstrate several finishes from a head and arm control.